Hi there and welcome.
You're listening to Animals and Us, Voices of a New Paradigm.
My name is Avantika, and I'm a researcher exploring animal consciousness, environmental sustainability, and planetary health. I want to help bring animal perspectives to the table and transform our relationship with the natural world.
And I'm Barbara. I'm an animal communicator and retired veterinarian. My true passion is exploring the hearts and souls of animals and helping people come to a much deeper understanding of who the animals truly are at their core.
This podcast is for anyone who loves animals and nature and has an interest in their own personal and spiritual development. We'll bring you powerful conversations with fascinating people about animal and nature sentience, consciousness, and communication.
Thank you so much for joining us on this journey of love, respect, understanding, and care for the fellow beings who share our beautiful Mother Earth with us.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of Animals and Us, Voices of a New Paradigm. I'm so happy today to introduce you all to Kristina Hunter, who I met just a few years ago and immediately felt like I had this heartwarming connection with, knowing that a lot of what she was talking about and teaching about resonated so deeply within me. And in fact, the way I met her is that I saw a post written by her on Facebook that talked about the intersection and the connection between our own personal health and environmental health. So immediately I was intrigued to find out more about that connection, how the two are related. And it was right around that time that I was starting to dive into animal communication and nature communication as well. And so developing this really deep connection and appreciation for the natural world, it just made me so curious to find out how my own health related to all of that. Kristina's approach, which we'll hear about today, involves looking at how taking care of ourselves is a part of and is a requirement for taking care of our environment. Her mission is to educate people on how to live well for the planet, for our communities, and for ourselves. She says that these actions should go hand in hand and build on one another. And by doing this well, she believes we can change the trajectory of human impact on the planet. Kristina's been teaching about environmental sustainability for over 20 years now. She has taught in MBA programs and programs for architecture, community health sciences. She's passionate about green buildings and sustainable community development. She's worked with governments and businesses to build sustainability into our systems and decision-making processes. She is an eco-impact speaker and mentor, and she's the founder of the Eco-Impact Academy, which we'll hear more about today. Kristina, welcome. We're finally doing this. So happy to be sitting down with you and chatting today. Welcome to our show.
Oh, thank you so much, Avantika. I'm so very, very happy to be here. And yeah, it's really lovely to see you doing what you're meant to be doing, which is talking about this connection that humans have with the natural world, with animals, and how we can foster and deepen that, and how important it is to so many of us to be able to acknowledge that deep connection that goes beyond some of the superficial things that we might feel are what we, in standard terms talk about with those connections in a utilitarian way. But I'm really so honored that you are living in your purpose and doing what you need to be doing by getting this out into the world. And I know it's making a big difference. So thank you for that.
Thank you so much. And as you were saying that, I was thinking back to when we first met, and I think this podcast was probably just an idea at that point, or maybe was just starting. Yeah. And I was very much it was part of the program, your program that I was in. And I was thinking about what action I can take. And I think this podcast was one of those things. I was like, I'm going to do it through this and maybe through moving and living in a different place that felt more aligned. So a lot has happened in the last few years. And I'm just so grateful to have had your guidance through your program and through the things that I discovered about myself through the work that, you know, I did in your program. So I know when we first started talking about intuitive communication with animals, it was an unusual, perhaps even uncomfortable conversation for you,
Yeah.
just in light of the academic and scientific background that you have. But I feel like the more we've been talking about it, I feel like I feel a shift in your openness to it. So tell us a little bit about that. What's it like as a sciencey person who, in air quotes, to hear about people being able to, and not just people, but even ourselves being able to communicate intuitively with animals in nature?
Yeah, it's a very interesting path that has opened up here, and seeing that researchers are involved in this, I think is wonderful, because science and research is about exploring the world and ourselves, right? And I know that we only are at this point along a continuum of understanding, right? And there are ways of knowing that are beyond science, and there are also, in our history of science, in the past, generously we put it a few hundred years of putting together the scientific method, and trying to assess things critically, through developing a hypothesis and testing it. I think that we know we have built upon our past knowledge of through this process, and I see that we're continuing to do that. So why should I think that we're at the end all and be all, that we should not continue to explore and see what we
Mhm.
can see? So, from a science perspective, I think, yes, let's do science on this, and try to see what we can learn about the
Mhm.
world, and how we can be better in the world as a result. But
Mhm.
on a personal, intuitive basis, I've had experiences, like I'm sure many of your listeners have, that just can't be explained with our current narrative. And even in my professional career, when I first started, we tried so hard to not anthropomorphize animals in discussions of biology and biological sciences, and conservation biology, trying to be very clear that we can't project emotions on wildlife animals, and so on. And yet, when you have a pet and you live with them day to day, you kind of pick up on their emotions, and their methods of communicating with us involve more than just the tone of their bark, but it's also a look in their eyes sometimes, or there are different ways that we can intuit what's going on with them. And yeah, most of us don't get actual words, from them, but we probably get really good at understanding what's going on with them from all the other cues that we might consciously see, or that are subconscious, that we're picking up on. So I think so many of us have had those experiences that it becomes a little bit hard to deny that there's more going on inside of an animal than most of us believe. And it's so fascinating when you think about it, that even rodents play, for example. So why is play important? Well,
Mhm.
biologically, it must be important. Okay, so what else is going on there with other emotions of happiness and joy that are exhibited at the birth of a whale? Is there any
Mhm.
other explanation than a flurry of excitement and movement and sounds when a pod is together, and a whale is born? I mean, why should we believe that it's not that? Let's
Mhm.
let's evaluate this with a more open
Mhm.
mind. And I think that biology is coming around to that now, understanding that elephants grieve based on their behavior. It looks very similar to our grieving. They return to the spot. They spend time there, and they appear to, really be remembering their lost family members. And it's really, I think, a little bit rich for us to believe that we're the only ones who have
Mhm.
complex emotions. So let's look a little bit more deeply at what's going on. And that can be done through science, but I think there's also other pathways of just opening up our own understanding of an experience with the natural world that can allow us to communicate in ways that might be very meaningful to us.
Mhm.
What harm is there in that, in communicating with a tree or with a bird you encounter, or or a stream? What is wrong with that?
Yeah.
There's really little to no harm in that, right?
Yeah. You've got
And
nothing to lose for
they've got
sure.
nothing to lose
Yeah.
and maybe everything to gain,
Yeah.
because we get to see the world in a different way that our everyday lives just don't give us.
Mhm.
A video on TikTok just doesn't really let
Yeah.
us open ourselves up to the world in the same way
Mhm.
as experiencing some other organism and what they might be experiencing. I mean,
Yeah.
I've had the opportunity to be in remote and beautiful places, and one of them is Wapusk National Park outside of Churchill, Manitoba. And it's one of the southernmost denning sites for polar bears. And I've had the opportunity to see polar bears in the wild, which is really wonderful. And at this spot where we stay in a field camp, it's fenced in, and we're inside the fence, and the bears are on the outside of the fence. And I've had a bear wander by, and I've looked into his eyes, and I've seen emotions there, and I don't know how or why, it just looked like an emotion to me. And I can't explain it, I can't verify it. And yet that's still my experience, and it was very profound.
Mhm.
So why not enjoy that connection?
Yeah.
Because we rob ourselves if we shut ourselves down to it. So
Yeah.
that's where I sit in all of this. But
Yeah.
I'm sure your listeners probably have like amazing experiences as well, because
Yeah.
they're listening to this. They're probably interested and have also experienced this type of connection. So
Yeah.
I would love to hear more of those stories.
I know it would, I think I have found for myself that when I open up and I start talking about this work with people,
Mm,
more often than not, they've got a story of some sort, an
right?
experience they've had or they've heard about or they've heard someone else do. It's so common.
Yeah.
And I love when people are just open to the experience. And
Yeah.
I think there's also something to be said about that experience, about having the exposure or being open to it, because when you have that lived experience, then it's hard to deny, and I think you were in Churchill, and I wanted to ask you about that because you had students there as well, and it was a whole experience for everyone involved. But I'm always curious about the role that firsthand experience has to play in us understanding and connecting and appreciating other beings that we share this planet with. Because if we don't have that firsthand experience, then I can understand why these concepts might seem far-fetched, because you just haven't been in that position. Even as simple as having a companion animal at
Yeah.
home. I mean, that's how this all started for me.
Mm,
I didn't even know that it was possible to feel the things that I was feeling and to experience the things that I was. And it's thanks to him that that whole world opened up for me. So I think I wonder what it was like for your students to actually be there instead of learning about things in textbooks, which I don't even know if textbooks still exist,
yeah.
but but just in a classroom or virtually or however we learn now, but to actually be there and see these beings walk by and to be in their environment and to be in their ecosystem and I wonder if there's a different way to engage the senses then, and to have that firsthand experience that we can't really get otherwise.
Right? I, there's something to it, I think, when you just walk on the same land as the
Mhm.
animal and you spend time there in the elements and understanding, what it's like in the driving rain and then when the sun comes out and dries you off and how beautiful it is, and then you get too hot and you want to go through the stream and you begin to get the rhythm of the land, which is what I've heard of Indigenous elders have said. They've spoken about knowing the rhythm of it. And that, I think, brings us so much closer to understanding a wild animal. And
Mhm.
we get to have a sense of their lives that go on without us,
Yeah.
that it's
Yeah.
really not about us. And it's not about, our devices that we get so caught up in and our deadlines and our
Yeah.
stressors and, all of these things that we put into our lives. And somehow I found that my students came away with so much confidence in themselves because all of those other things fell away. The
Mhm.
stress of a deadline, the stress of what your body looks like, the stress of social pressures, it fell away and allowed people around me to feel more confident and more curious and more open to just being
Mhm.
and understanding that they are beings and that's enough.
Yeah.
I can't say every student went through that, but some of them really did. And they learned things about themselves that came through in small ways, but it looked like being a bigger person and a better person as a result.
Mhm.
And it was so interesting because they often, almost always talked about being profoundly changed by the experience. And
Yeah.
that's really incredible when you think about it. Just spending a little bit of time in the land, on the land, and learning about the land and how we interact with it and how indigenous cultures have lived on the land has allowed them to really feel like, oh, the things I've spent my days worried about don't really matter. Other
Mhm.
things matter more. And then they looked like more confident and more in tune with themselves, as well as because of this connection with the natural world.
Yeah.
Yes, it's been really incredible to see that over the many years that I've seen students do this type of work and head out onto the land. And so I think it's a really profound experience and something that I wish our education systems supported more. But
Mhm.
yeah,
And we're lucky now. I mean, through this work, I'm seeing that there are wonderful scholars and other people in this field in education who are working hard to bring this into, into elementary schools, into high schools, and helping children get out there and just experience it. Because as you were speaking, I was thinking back to my university days, and I'm thinking, I don't know if I'd call any of them profound,
right?
Some of them were fun and very interesting and
Yeah,
fascinating and all of those things, but I'm not sure if I ever had in 4 years of going to classes a profound experience. But
yeah,
I imagine if I even spent, a weekend or a day or 2 days just being out in nature, having an experience where I could just be part of this, part of the land and just turn everything else off. I imagine that would be, I would learn so much in that experience, just being. And our conversation is reminding me of something I posted on Instagram just a couple of days ago. It said, "You are here to live, not to earn, not to stress, not to prove, not even to please,
yeah,
just to live." And I think it's really, of
Hmm.
all the places and of all the settings and environments where we can really feel the truth of that,
Hmm.
is out in nature. When we
Uh,
can really feel like, if we can understand that we are a part of that nature as well. We are just and also another being who's part of
yeah.
um that world. They are all just living and being, and nature does its thing.
Hmm.
We are like that as well, but this world just kind of engulfs us in all of its human-made constructs. So,
Yeah. Right. But I think science is just beginning to catch up to that, right? We're
yeah,
beginning to understand the psychology of the environment and
yeah.
what that can do for, well, they talk about how patients heal faster when you see something green out of a
Hmm.
hospital window and you
Yeah.
need pain meds, like those types of things. And well, we've also seen the longevity and social outcomes that are quite positive from having an animal in your home or
Hmm.
caring for a plant and that kind of thing. So I think, yeah, science is starting to
Yeah.
understand that
Yeah.
reality that many of us know already. And what's really good is I think it doesn't have to be, you don't have to take a, remote trip that takes you days to
Yeah.
get into, a really extremely remote place. It can be as simple as seeing the nature that's all around you.
Yeah.
And I don't care where you live, there is still nature all around you
Hmm. Hmm.
because, that air you're taking in is
Yeah.
still nature,
Yeah.
right? So
I was just going to say that, like, it's actually so simple. It can be so simple. The things that we are now studying, hearing the sound of water every day, or why the bird songs are calming for our nervous system. Like, these are actually such simple things, such simple medicine, that can help us a lot.
percent.
I wanted to ask you, we've talked about this before a little bit, that it can be challenging for professionals in academic and educational roles like yours to bring emotion into your work. And so I wanted to ask you, how do you navigate the challenge of being a professional and all that that comes with, and still acknowledging the emotional connection to nature and animals? In what ways can recognizing emotions in our personal and professional lives be beneficial?
Hmm. That's such a good question, Avantika. And I don't think I've ever told you this, but I remember very clearly in my early days of teaching, decades ago already, I I was showing a video to my class in environmental sciences, and it was an intro to environmental science, and it was about whales that were emaciated because we'd been fishing the food chain and depleting it. And it was so heartbreaking to me. I had, the lights were off and I sat in the rows with the students and tears were just streaming down my face. And I thought, oh my gosh, I've got to get it together and get back up there and cover up that emotion. And I think it was so profound and yet so telling that I felt that had no place in a classroom. And I think it's really unfortunate when we think of being professional as equating that to having no emotion, no inner life, no, personal, you know, um, yeah, consequences to the things that we're talking about, because that's completely false and really not how we operate as humans.
And
And
unfortunate.
and unfortunate. And what
Yeah.
are we teaching people if we show that that should be without emotion? So I have really changed my understanding of that. And yet I want to be sensitive to other people, to the people in the room who are also experiencing this, that they might have to protect themselves, from the full emotions that are there. So I do like to, warn people if there's some hard things there that we're looking at. So that's what I started to do in my classroom at the university. But now I decided to focus on positive things, not just positive, but solutions in my work now. I said that I spent 20 years of my career 20 plus years talking about problems, and now I just want to deal with solutions. I think that we all know about the problems, and the problems are important to know about, and it's vital that we study them. It's vital that we talk about them. But the problem is that I think we sometimes fall into the trap of thinking that if people just knew the problem, they would take action and there would be solutions. And this is a real issue, I think, in the ENGO community, the environmental non-government organization community. If they only knew the harms, then they would do something different. But it's wrong. It's borne out in the last 20, 30 years that we've been talking about climate change and species loss and environmental degradation and pollution. We haven't changed, dramatically because of that messaging. We really need to look at ways to create change. And why do we create change? Why does anyone take action? We take action when we feel good. We freeze up when we feel bad, and we look the other way, and we put blinders on to protect ourselves. So I think it's really important that we acknowledge, we understand, we research what's wrong, but there's that problem of paralysis by analysis, right? Where we talk about, and it's so frustrating in many, activist communities where you want change to happen and the government says they'll study it. Well, they were already studying it, and we already know about harm. So that's where we have to rely on things like the precautionary principle, and that says that if harm is happening and there's a reasonable way to prevent that harm, we just have to take action. So I'm all about the taking action where you can, and we don't need to belabor those problems, because for one, it's just personally very difficult, to look at for people. And, people are dealing with all kinds of things. They're dealing with issues of social injustices that, they're dealing with on a daily basis, or other, issues that are just difficult in their lives. And I took that step many years ago when I was going through my own health crisis. It was a major, health issue 10 plus years ago. And I just said, okay, I can't look at the news anymore. I'll hear about it, I'll listen to it, but I can't look at the images. And that was just what I decided was best for me. I'm informed. I know about things, but I'll read about it and hear about it rather than look at the images for the most part, just because that was a way for me to protect my tender, tender soul. And because we all have all kinds of things that we're dealing with. And maybe that difficult news is too difficult. And that doesn't help anybody to look at the difficult things only. What I think leads to action, leads to change, is to talk about the solutions that are at hand. I mean, many of these things we know the answer to, because of the research that happens about, how to avoid collisions of whales and ships in harbors and, in the ocean. So there's lots and lots of good evidence. So let's start taking action and look at solutions, because they are there, and we can test them out. We can look for the most practical ones for the scenario. And I feel that people get so energized by solutions, and they feel so much more positive emotion, and positive emotion drives our behavior, right? Negative emotions, they stall us out. They stop us from taking action. And so I really have chosen to focus on the positive solutions, not pretending that things are all positive, but looking for answers and ways to contribute to that in whatever way we can for the situation, for our stage in life, for our energy, for our resources. And that's been very rewarding because you get real action like what you're doing here with this podcast, like what other people do in their own lives, and how they approach things, and don't tune out and turn it all off. They
Yeah.
actually make change.
I find one of the other things about having that kind of outlook is that it is more sustainable. When this is just for me, I admire the work that other people are out there doing, and it's important. We need everyone to show up in their different roles, like playing their different roles and doing what they feel called to do. But I know one of the things Barbara and I always talk about, and especially with this podcast, is that for us, it's so important to come from a place of love. We
Yeah,
know all the issues out there and we can talk about them here, but this is a space we want to create where people can leave feeling good. They can leave feeling more love in their hearts, that they can feel more excited to look at things differently. And I know for me, I have to follow that because if I just find that taking action out of anger or fear is
yeah.
just a lot harder. And it's a lot harder to keep that going because you run out of energy because there are a million and one things that you're fighting against. But when you're doing things from a place of love and curiosity and joy, then not only do you just keep going, but it also creates this ripple effect of positive energy that is contagious. It can be really contagious. And I just find that for me, that is, I can create more impact that way. And I can feel even more connected to what I'm doing and the messages that we're trying to get across is to do it from a place of love. So I completely get that. That's and to each their own, right? Everyone will have different things that drive them. But I know I've come to that conclusion for myself is that that's what feels most aligned is to come at it from this approach.
Right. And I think I love that you use the word sustainably, or that it's not sustainable because, yes, that's the other, the part of the definition that how the word is used is the ability to be sustained, or,
Mhm.
to continue on. And yes, the anger can fuel action, but it can be hard. It can be hard to maintain that and to keep it going. And I love that you act out of love, and that is sustainable in the end.
I also think that, ultimately the people who are in power or have the ability to make decisions, um, sure, we can put pressure on them from different angles, and science and research can definitely, they have to take those things into account. But on a human level, on a very personal level, if we're able to have them experience something different that they haven't experienced before, or if we're able to shift something in their heart or in their emotions,
Mhm.
like maybe this is wishful thinking, I don't know, but I'd like to think that when we're talking about corporations and governments making decisions, they're made up of people. They're made up of individual people. And
Exactly.
if we are able to shift people's emotions, help them become more compassionate, and I think that the way to do that is through what we were talking about before, which is through lived experience, through,
Right.
having them connect more deeply with those that their actions impact. Again, I don't know, maybe this is wishful thinking, but I'd like to believe that that would have more power. So somebody could go in and be like, I want to show up differently in this job that I have, in this role that I have, this particular thing that I'm responsible for. Maybe I can approach things differently. I don't know. That's just my hope for,
Right.
that's me being optimistic. I called myself a hopeless optimist the other day and I was corrected. They said, you're a hopeful optimist. And I was like, okay, I'll take it. But I feel like, it's everyone has emotions, every human has emotions, these decisions we're making. Yeah, there are a lot of people, there are a few people that hold a lot of power. But if we
Mm.
can get people in those positions of power that are more compassionate, that see things differently, then maybe we can start moving in the right direction. I
I
don't know.
love that you came around to the idea and the concept that corporations are people.
Mhm.
People make corporations, people make organizations, people make laws and systems. And to me, that's
Mhm.
actually very hopeful, right?
Yeah.
People made the systems we have,
Hmm.
right? We
Hmm.
made these factory farms. We made the commercial, industrial, agricultural system. That means we can unmake it.
Yeah.
you know
Yeah.
and there, I just googled this quote by Margaret Mead that came to mind, and you might have heard this, but it says, uh, apparently Margaret Mead said, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed individuals can change the world. In fact, it's the only thing that ever has. So
Hmm.
that's
Wow. Yeah.
really what it is. That's
Yeah.
really what has happened over millennia, is that thoughtful, committed people came together with common goals around
Hmm.
change, and they made it happen. I mean,
Hmm.
we've seen many, many changes already around animal welfare, around, environmental, respecting the environment, trying to live more sustainably, understanding our carbon emissions, that kind of thing. That's really been driven by thoughtful, committed people. And
Right.
we have seen a lot of change, even though it's slow and not
Hmm.
fast enough, and never enough. But when will it ever be? So we just have to keep going, right?
Yeah.
But to me, that's so hopeful.
Yeah. And one of the things my dad has always shared with me is that the news media will always share the bad stuff because
Right.
those are fear tactics at their best. And those are the headlines that get the most views.
Yeah.
That's how the media works.
Yeah.
There are good things happening in the world every day, every moment, and those things just don't get nearly as much coverage. So I'm not denying that there are terrible things happening out in the world. They're happening right now as we speak,
Yeah.
but there are also good things happening. They just don't get as much media attention. They're not as sensationalized, he says. So yeah, it's all part of, and that's part of what you talked about before, right? Is shifting our mindset is that can help. That helps me, that for sure. That when something terrible is happening, I also have to remember that there are committed, driven people that are working hard to make changes as well. And things are shifting. And that actually leads us right into the Eco Impact Academy. So tell us more about that. Tell us more about this program you have started, that you have launched. And I had the great privilege of joining your program. It was probably 2 years ago now, I think, and it has evolved. And I would love for you to share with people what it's all about and what you're hoping to accomplish through that.
Oh, you're wonderful. Thank you very much for allowing me to talk about that. Yeah. It's very exciting. I love what I'm doing, and I feel that it's the best use of my energy and time right now, in this world. So I get to help eco-conscious professional women who feel grief and guilt and sadness about climate change and the state of the world. And I help them to make meaningful change in ways that light them up, so they can feel at ease and know that their actions really align with their values and create a better world. So we do that through understanding, acknowledging the emotions that come with this work that we're doing, acknowledge that that's perfectly normal. And then we talk about the ways in which we can care for ourselves, as we talked about a little bit, and it's usually not the things that are just led to us on social media about self-care. It's really a little bit different than that, but it gets into our values, and then we really reflect on those and understand what's a real priority in our lives and try to make our days reflect those values. And that means that we also get to choose the actions that we take when it comes to environmental action. We don't have to do it all, and we actually shouldn't try to do it all, because when we try to do it all, we get overwhelmed and we freeze up and we don't do anything, or we burn out. And that's not good. That's not sustainable over the long term. So we really get to choose how to take action and choose the actions that are most effective by aligning them with your values, with your skills and your interests, and what the world needs, and where you have leverage. So that means that we all have points of leverage. We talked about that idea of control a little bit, but it's kind of something that people don't always think about. They think about environmental sustainability as happening kind of in the home and with their dollars, how you spend your dollars. But we can also look at how we spend our time and how we influence other people as being points of leverage. And there are many more of those than you might think about. So that's an important consideration, and that might feel hopeful to you when you realize, oh, I could actually make change in this area and see some results. And then we can look at it really approaching the issues from getting back to sustainability from this situational sustainability perspective, where I get people to reflect on what actually is the best actions to take for this situation, taking into consideration where you're at in your life. What are your other demands with your family responsibilities, or with your job, or with your kids, or your own health, or whatever it might be. We have to take that into consideration in terms of designing the actions that are going to be best for this situation. We get to be part of the decision making, and our needs as well are part of that. And that allows us to either take a little one-off action, something that's right here and now. I'm just going to take this action to change, the way I'm shopping, every week for my groceries, and what kind of foods I bring into the home. That can be relatively easy. You can do it just for this week. You can try it out, whatever. Or you can just think of these other sort of simple one-off actions that are great ideas to do and make change. But then we can also look at it in terms of making it something that lasts longer, that becomes more of a systemic change, whether that be in your household or in your community or your workplace or your country. That can happen as well through bigger actions that involve changing systems, which might involve advocating for different legislation. That would be a systemic change. But it can also just involve changing identity around, how your community thinks about the value of the forest, in your urban or rural environment, or how you think about the wildlife around you, and how you identify with that can really have long-term impacts on the decisions you make. If you identify and believe that it's part of who you are. The natural environment is part of the assets of this neighborhood, and then therefore we're going to protect it in a different way than if we just see it as land that's valued at this dollar figure, right? So it can be very different when we think about systemic change. Yes, you can change the laws, you can change that, but you can also change this identity, how you think about it, how you relate to it. Or you can just change it in your own family, for example. We're a family that gives that just gives consumable gifts, things that are things that we would need anyways, or we give experiences or food and, and treats that way rather than material goods, because we all have enough material goods. So we're a family who gives gifts in that way rather than in a sort of material consumptive way. So that's not very hard to do, but can have a real lasting change. And even an intergenerational identity shift can happen through pretty small and simple, but ongoing shifts in how we think about it. And then I think we can even get to changes that last longer and are bigger when we integrate different aspects of that sustainable well-being tree when we think about the personal and community and natural world. And if we integrate different elements of that into a project or initiative, it tends to be more self-sustaining because we're involving more partners and there are more benefits. And then if one person drops off, the project still continues on, and the benefits are seen by so many that more people tend to come to it. So it sort of has a snowball effect. And I think that's probably the highest level of impact that we can have, because it not only changes identity, but it has implications in different realms of the world that we live in, right? For humans are doing better, and the community as a whole is doing better, the human community, and then the natural world, and we're integrated more in terms of our change. So that would be a more integrative kind of change to make. But whatever actions we take, they should be suited to the situation that we're in, that also includes our own personal situation and the energy we have. So that's more or less what I help people with through an online course and ongoing mentoring. So that's the Eco Impact Academy.
Amazing. Thank you for walking us through that. I think one of the things I know I walked away from the program with was just this sense of empowerment that I myself as one person can make changes and can make a difference. And I think we talked about this before about there being a ripple effect. I've seen it happen. I've seen it, when one person makes, even just through a conversation, like you said, with your neighbor, or with showing by taking an action and other people watching, whether it's family, friends,
Right.
they see you care about something, that can make more impact than lecturing them about something. It's just, actions can speak louder than words. So can you share with our audience how they can find you, and also tell us about your newsletter, which I love and I look forward to every Friday. You just released, today's a Friday, your 225th newsletter. So I love getting that in my inbox. It's beautiful, it's warm, it's informative, it's thought-provoking, it's inspiring. So tell people how they can find you, the work that you're doing, and sign up for your newsletter if they're interested.
Thank you. Yeah, that would be really lovely. I'd love people to check me out. I basically, I feel like I just help these wonderful women change the world and make it a better place. And so I don't mind promoting that, because there's so much that women in particular have to offer to this world that I just want to foster and promote that among especially women and female identifying people. Everybody has something to offer, but in particular, I think women have maybe a special connection to nature, and that's what I love to foster and support. So I have a website, and it's simply KristinaHunterFlourishing.com. It's Kristina with a K. I have a podcast. It's called Live Well Green. Can be found wherever you get your podcasts. And I'd love for you to sign up for my newsletter. It comes out every Friday, as you mentioned, and it simply talks about how to live more sustainably in ways that support our own well-being and the planet. So I thank you so much,
Wonderful.
Avantika.
We wish you all the best as you continue to help other people find ways that are well aligned with them and what they need and changes that they can make in their lives. And thank you for the lovely conversation. It was so nice having you here. Is there anything before we end off that you would like to share with our audience?
No, I wanted to thank you, Avantika and Barbara, for doing this work. I think what you just mentioned is that we're all in this together. That idea that you're not alone in these feelings that you have about feeling deeply connected to the natural world. There are many, many people. And as you said, usually when you start a conversation with somebody about these things, people do have these experiences that they know intuitively, that
Mhm.
they have experienced themselves. And it's really useful to have a forum like this that acknowledges what many of us already know, that there are deeper connections than the utilitarian ones between humans and the natural world. And it's really very, very fundamental, I think, to who we are as beings. And it's so lovely to be tapping into this understanding and that we have a community of people who also understand that. So thank you for bringing
Yeah.
that forward. I appreciate
Yeah,
it.
thank you. Thank you so much. I wish I knew this quote off the top of my head, but it's something along the lines of, we can't solve problems from the same place that they were created.
Right.
And that's really what I hope we're moving towards is if we can
Yeah.
change who we are and how we see things, then the problems we're trying to solve will hopefully find better solutions to them. So yes, well, thank you to our audience for tuning in today. We're so happy you were able to join us for this conversation. And as always, we're going to end with a brief blessing for the animals.
We'd like to end this podcast by taking just a moment to be quiet. And we give thanks and blessings to these amazing animals that we share our lives with. They give us so much and ask for so little in return. We hope that you can keep the animals and all living beings in your heart and in your mind as you go about your day. Thank you so much for being here with us today.